Hello and welcome to the Commander's Quarters, your Magic the Gathering source that helps you command your budget. This show and episodes like this one are possible thanks to viewers like you. If you're looking for an easy way to help support this show, make sure that you like, share, and subscribe. Also, hit that bell notification icon so you don't miss any new episodes. You can also go check out our playmats and other merchandise at thecommandersquarters.com. We also have a ton of brand new t-shirt designs in stock, so make sure you check out those as well. Another easy way to support this show is with our TCG Player affiliate links. So whether you're buying a deck or individual cards, you can use this general link right here or one in the description. And the final way that you can support this show is by supporting us directly by becoming a patron. There are many benefits to being a patron, and I truly couldn't do this without all of their support. Hey everyone, Mitch coming in for the Commander's Quarters studio. Welcome to the show. So it has finally arrived. The final day of spoiler season for Streets of New Capenna is here. I guess next week, early in the week, I think Monday, Tuesday, we get the Commander Precons fully revealed. But yeah, this is the last day of spoiler season for the official set, not the Precons. You know what I mean. Regardless, we have seen a ton of exciting cards this spoiler season, including Mari the Killing Quill, and my prediction is that this commander will be a hit. And if you watch the episode, you'll see why I say that. Regardless, don't leave for that episode just yet, because on this episode, I'm going to be talking about Slip Out the Back, which is a really solid card. My goodness, I think that this thing is going to see, well, a lot of play in some different ways. And before we jump into it, a big thank you to Eddie for all your help during spoiler season, and if you want to thank Eddie as well, make sure you blame Eddie in the comments below. But now with that said, let's jump into it. So, Slip Out the Back is an instant for just a single blue mana, and it says, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature, it phases out. Now, phasing is a very old mechanic that they started bringing back recently, and yeah, I mean, this is a really solid mechanic that can do a lot of powerful things. So, when that creature phases out, you treat it and anything attached to it as though they don't exist until its controller's next turn. Phasing is kind of unlike any other mechanic that we really have in any other way to protect a permanent. Other ways might be to give something hexproof or indestructible, which can, protect from targeted removal or maybe a board wipe, but the creature is still there, so, there are still things that can impact it. If someone, say, casts an edict effect or forces everyone to take their creatures and put them on the bottom of their library, well, that creature is still going to go away. There are then some spells that can exile creatures and bring them back, but some of those exile those creatures and bring them back right away, which really doesn't help you when a board wipe is happening. Because it's like, oh no, here comes the Wrath of God. All right, I'll leave. Oh, I'm back. Oh my gosh, that Wrath of God is still there. Oh no. Now, there are ones that exile and bring the creature back at the end of the turn, but in that case, then you still lose whatever is attached to it. So, if you had +1/+1 counters, or if you had equipment or auras, those are gone. So yeah, phasing just works differently, and again, this old mechanic is one that I am very glad they brought back because it's a way to protect a creature and kind of have it be frozen in time. Okay, you are exactly as you are. I mean, I guess with this card now, you get an extra counter on you. You're exactly as you are, and you're just going to stay here, and then we'll pick things back up on the controller's next turn. And actually, that's something that I really want to highlight about this card is its flexibility. Because again, you could actually target an opponent's creature with this if you really need to. Now, obviously, you are giving that creature a counter, but if someone's swinging at you for lethal on that turn, this is a great 1 mana, how about not right now kind of spell. Because then maybe on your next turn, you've got the mana or you can draw into a card that can help you deal with that situation when it comes back up. So yeah, this card is a fantastically flexible card, an incredibly solid card at 1 mana. It can protect one of your creatures from a board wipe, target removal, edict effects, etc, etc, etc. Whereas other similar cards, and we'll talk about those here in a bit, might help out in some situations, but not all. And again, if your creature's got a bunch of equipment or auras or counters on it, it keeps those intact. And of course, like I just mentioned as well, it's flexible enough to say, hey, opponent with your giant creature, let's just have your creature not be there for a bit, okay? So let's quickly jump in and talk about some comparable cards to this one, and then talk about some commanders that are really going to want to consider this card. Now, we have seen a somewhat similar spell before with Reality Ripple, which is an instant for 1 and a blue, so yeah, 1 mana more, which is a massive difference. And this one says target artifact, creature, or land phases out. Now, yes, this one is slightly more flexible in that you can target an artifact or a land with it, but the vast majority of the time with, these phasing effects, you're probably going to be targeting creatures and trying to save creatures of your own, most likely your commander. And again, when it comes to a 1 mana spell versus a 2 mana spell, that is a huge difference. So yeah, although according to EDH Rec, Reality Ripple only sees play in 721 decks, I expect this brand new card to see a lot more play. I mean, it's not gonna even be close. Now, I did mention that there are other effects out there that can be used to protect your creatures, of course, and yeah, at just the exact same mana cost, at just a single blue mana, let's talk about cards like Essence Flux, Alchemist Retrieval, and Mizzium Skin. Now, each of these can be effective in their own situations, but they each have their upsides and downsides. Essence Flux says, exile target creature you control, then return that card to the battlefield under its owner's control. If it's a spirit, put a +1/+1 counter on it. Now, in the vast majority of circumstances, that spirit part really doesn't matter all that much, but having a 1 mana blink spell does. So for the most part, this can be used to save your creature from targeted removal, and also, if you want to use and abuse ETBs or LTBs, that's a great way to do it as well. That being said, again, because the creature is leaving play and coming back, obviously you are losing any, counters or auras or equipment attached to it. And then obviously this doesn't protect from a board wipe either because, if someone casts a Wrath of God, I'm just gonna leave. I'm gonna come back. Oh no, Wrath of God is still there. Next up, Alchemist Retrieval is a great piece of tech that we got from, I believe, Crimson Vow? Yeah. Anyways, it is an instant for a blue that has cleave for 1 and a blue, and it says return target non-land permanent you control to its owner's hand. So this is also a flexible spell, and if we just cast it for that blue, well, we get to bounce target non-land permanent we control back to our hand, so yeah, that can be a way to protect, say, one of our creatures, or another non-land permanent. And then obviously with that flexibility, if we just pay 1 more mana, we can bounce an opponent's permanent instead. That being said, obviously, bouncing a permanent is a good way to protect it, but we have to recast that permanent then. Now, obviously, we can then still benefit from any ETBs or LTBs or whatnot, but yeah, it's going to be a lot more mana intensive than just phasing that creature out and saying, okay, you stay right here, but not here, and I'll see you next turn. And then another somewhat flexible card that we could use to help save our creature, or should I say creatures, is Mizzium Skin. It's an instant that says target creature you control get +0/+1 and gains Hexproof until end of turn, and it's got an overload cost of 1 and a blue. Again, Hexproof can be a great way to protect a creature from targeted removal, and this one just says, hey, now all my creatures get protection from targeted removal, and, +0/+1, because, that might be relevant. Maybe. Regardless, again, this does not protect a creature, or should I say your creatures, from, edict effects or board wipes. Whereas phasing out protects your creature from the vast majority of things. Now again, all these cards have their upsides and downsides, and some are more impactful in some decks than others, but yeah, I mean, if you're looking for a spell that strictly protects your creature, this brand new one might be the most effective the vast majority of the time. And with phasing, there's actually some pretty sneaky things that you can do with it. So now let's talk about some creatures like Uro, Titan of Nature's Wrath, Kroxa, Titan of Death's Hunger, and Phyrexian Dreadnought. Each of these are somewhat similar in that when they enter the battlefield, you need to sacrifice them unless a specific condition is met. Uro, Titan of Nature's Wrath is a 6/6 for just 1 green-blue that has when it enters the battlefield, sacrifice it unless it escaped, and when it enters the battlefield or attacks, you gain 3 life and draw a card, and then you may put a land card from your hand onto the battlefield. Kroxa is also a 6/6 that has the exact same text when it enters the battlefield, sacrifice unless it escaped, but then it has, whenever it enters the battlefield or attacks, each opponent discards a card, then each opponent who didn't discard a non-land card this way loses 3 life. And then Phyrexian Dreadnought is a very old card, so I'm going to read its Oracle text. It is a 12/12 trampling Phyrexian Dreadnought that has been updated, that just costs 1, and it has, when it enters the battlefield, sacrifice it unless you sacrifice any number of creatures with total power 12 or greater. Now, the funny thing about phasing is that when those sacrifice triggers go on the stack, well, you can just now utilize this new 1 mana spell to say, okay, I'm going to put a counter on you, and you phase out. And that creature is going to phase out, and that trigger is going to fizzle. They are not going to be sacrificed because they are not there, even though, again, they are there. Kind of. So essentially, you can utilize phasing in a sneaky way to kind of get around that sacrifice trigger and keep them around. Which obviously can be quite impactful, especially, with a Phyrexian Dreadnought, say on turn 2. If you just have, like $100 lying around for one of those. Regardless, just something to think about and kind of one of the ways that you can utilize phasing in your favor. Speaking of which, there are also commanders out there that can really utilize phasing, like Arami of the Dead Tide. Arami is a 1/4 Merfolk wizard that has tap exile cards from your graveyard equal to the number of opponents you have. Target creature card in your graveyard gains Encore until end of turn. The Encore cost is equal to its mana cost. And Encoring basically means you exile that creature, pay its mana cost, and then for each opponent you get a copy of that creature, and that creature must attack, and then at the end of the turn you have to sacrifice it, activate only as a sorcery. So Arami can essentially get multiple copies of massive creatures out of your graveyard, and yeah, those creatures would normally be sacrificed at the beginning of the next end step, but again, with this new phasing card, you can obviously utilize that to say, okay, creature token version of this awesome creature, let's keep you around. I'll get a counter on you, you're going to phase out. That, sacrifice at the end step is not going to happen, and then when I come to my next turn, you're going to be there. And of course, again, it just has the flexibility of being a fantastic protection spell for your commander, and, a temporary removal spell for one of your opponent's creatures. Next up, in a somewhat similar way, there's Cedrus the Trader King. Cedrus has each creature card in your graveyard has Unearth for 2 and a black, so basically you pay 2 and a black, you return the card to play, that creature gains haste, remove the game at the end of the turn, or if it would leave play, Unearth only as a sorcery. So with this, you can kind of cheat some massive creatures into play for just 3 mana, essentially. Now those creatures would just go away at the end of the turn, but again, with this new phasing card, you maybe cheat out a massive Eldrazi like an It That Betrays or something like that. You go, you swing with it, and then you say, okay, well, before we have to remove you at the end of the turn, let's just phase you out. Here's a counter, and phase out, and we'll see you in a bit. So yeah, ways to get around actually losing creatures that you should be losing is definitely a way that phasing can be used. Also, another commander that is definitely going to be considering this card is a partner commander with Ishai Ojutai Dragonspeaker. Ishai is just a 1/1 flyer, but it's not going to stay 1/1 for long because it says whenever an opponent casts a spell, put a +1 counter on Ishai Ojutai Dragonspeaker. So Ishai can get absolutely massive in no time, and yeah, again, it is pretty dependent on those counters on it, so, having spells that might blink it or bounce it to protect it, well, that kind of defeats the purpose of having counters on it. So instead now, you get a spell that actually makes it larger again by getting another counter on it and protects it again in the vast majority of situations. Again, on top of allowing it to keep any, auras or, especially equipment attached to it. Next up, how about Marchesa the Black Rose, a 3/3 with Dethrone that says other creatures you control have Dethrone, which again means that whenever this creature attacks the player with the most life or tied for the most life, you get a counter on it. And then whenever a creature you control with a +1 counter on it dies, return that card to the battlefield under your control at the beginning of the next end step. So Marchesa absolutely loves having creatures that have counters on them, and yeah, this is a fantastic protection spell that can easily get a counter on something, so that counter becomes a lot more important in commander decks that, really care about counters like this one. So it's kind of a form of double protection in this way, where you're protecting the creature by phasing it out and also by keeping a counter on it, then next time it would die, it comes back into play under your control at the end step. And finally, another commander that absolutely loves phasing, well, depending on the build, is Braid's Conjurer Adept. Braids is a 2/2 human wizard that says at the beginning of each player's upkeep, that player may put an artifact, creature, or land card from their hand onto the battlefield. So, obviously, in the vast majority of scenarios, this is going to allow your opponents to, get things into play before you do, because, well, Braids is going to be in play, you don't get your upkeep trigger yet, and then your opponents get theirs before you do, so they can put some massive things into play first. But if you'd like to deny your opponents of doing that, well, at least for one turn, let's just, target Braids and phase it out. So Braids is going to leave, Braids is kind of there, but not there, and then by the time your next upkeep hits, it's going to phase back in just in time for you to get that upkeep trigger. So yeah, Braids is definitely going to want to consider this spell. But now as this episode is coming to a close, it's time for me to give you my final thoughts on Slip Out the Back. Yeah, overall, Slip Out the Back is just a very solid 1-mana spell, and there are going to be a ton of decks out there that are going to be considering this spell for one reason or another. Again, there are definitely ways that you can use and abuse phasing, or ways that you can utilize phasing to protect creatures, and ways that, well, other spells just can't do. So yeah, if your commander's color identity has blue and you need a fantastic way to protect them in the vast majority of situations, well, this is probably a good spell to consider. That being said, of course, there are plenty of other exciting spoilers, and yeah, I've done a ton of quick takes this spoiler season, so make sure you check those out, and make sure you're staying tuned for even more quick takes today. And with that, the show is coming to a close, so it's my turn to hear from you. So in the comments below, let me know what your thoughts on this episode are, and as always, thanks again, and have a good one.